Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Tim Gordon. This week, our focus is the community of Longview, reeling in the wake of a terrible tragedy. Before we get to the latest developments, here's what you can expect from this program. First, the nuts and bolts, what happened, when it happened, and what we've learned since. Then the impact on victims, their families, and the broader community. We'll also take a closer look at the history of the facility and recent violations connected to it. And later, to help us better understand the emotional toll of a tragedy like this, we'll speak with a psychologist from the University of Oregon. On Tuesday, May 26th, a chemical tank ruptured at the Nippon Dynawave facility. In this video, you can see the immediate aftermath of that blast. You can see the mangled tank, work trucks flipped and crushed, and puddles of toxic liquid. We are taping this episode, by the way, on Thursday morning, and so far, officials have confirmed 8 people were injured, 2 people died, with 9 others, all mill workers, presumed dead. Well, that is 11 people gone or feared dead in just moments, leaving behind family, friends, co-workers, and a community desperately waiting for answers about what went wrong. And those answers may take time. Recovery operations resumed Wednesday and continued Thursday. Officials say crews first had to stabilize the site, including the ruptured tank, which still contains a significant amount of what's known as white liquor.
Recovery efforts began earlier today, and they'll continue to be slow, methodical, and deliberate. The priority is ensuring responder safety while treating every victim with the greatest dignity, care, and respect as possible.
Officials also confirmed some of the white liquor leaked into the Columbia River, as well as a nearby dike and drainage system.
Our records show that our continuous monitoring for pH on our outfalls that go to the Columbia River showed spikes of high pH material at roughly the initial incident at 7:15 in the morning, and then approximately 2 or 3 hours later.
As far as drinking water goes, the city of Longview confirmed Thursday it is safe and there is no immediate threat to the public. We want to shift our focus now to the people and families forever changed by this tragedy. Many of the victims have not yet been officially identified, but on Wednesday, we heard from the family of Gilbert Bernal. Bernal, a proud father and grandfather, worked at the facility for about 15 years as an electrician and was set to celebrate his 32nd wedding anniversary in just a few weeks. His son also works at the plant and was there when the blast happened. Here's Alma McCarty with that story.
Yeah, I was on site. I was helping with the situation for about 2 hours.
Eli Bernal, who works at the plant with his father, recalling the moments after the tank collapsed.
The steam cloud was so big, covered everything. Couldn't see through it. I remember seeing a truck drive straight through it because we got this call and we're heading down there and this truck's going straight through it and he disappears. You don't see him anymore. So thick.
And as the dust began to settle, this was the scene on site. Trucks flipped over, rubble covering the ground. Fear for the safety of his father set in.
I panicked. My heart dropped.
He called us immediately.
I called my mom, the second I saw it.
We were truly hoping that our dad was going to be okay.
Gilbert Bernal's daughter says he passed away not long after he was taken to the hospital.
He probably knew his fate, but it gives me peace of mind that he was so calm because he was a godly man and knew that this was his time.
His death, one of 2 confirmed by officials so far. 9 employees, as of Wednesday night, have not been recovered.
On behalf of NDP, these are our people. We are focused on our people.
Wish I could know what went wrong on a everyday normal day.
Yeah, I think we just want answers.
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest thing, is just to know what happened.
Yeah.
I know it's still early. I know they can't give us all the details. But I still want to know what happened to my dad.
Leaders like Congresswoman Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez promising to get those answers.
This is a priority that I will not let slip. The families that I've spoken with, I'm committed to making sure that we get the answers in the investigation and the transparency that we need.
Meantime, the community awaits its next update in what will likely be the deadliest industrial tragedy in Washington state history.
It's really hard to comprehend that they're gone and I don't even know them. You know, it's just really sad. So hopefully we can just come together as a community and heal.
Alma McCarty, KGW News.
Well, it turns out 4 people injured in the blast received treatment at Legacy Oregon Burn Center in Portland. The white liquor in the tank used to break down wood chips in the paper-making process causes severe chemical burns. The Burn Center's medical director says patients needed decontamination, and doctors considered the impacts from the fumes and the blast itself. Dr. Nick Ishragi praised first responders and the company for quickly sharing information about the chemical so that doctors could protect themselves and make treatment plans. He said it doesn't take much time for caustic chemicals to cause significant damage.
You know, these are major what we call corrosion burns, and once the skin has been damaged badly, it needs skin grafting, and depending on the amount of stuff we have to do, recovery is in terms of weeks to months and sometimes a lifetime. So these are major, they can be potentially major life-changing injuries.
Ironically, Legacy plans to open its new Oregon Burn Center next week, one that's been promoted as being better equipped to handle large-scale incidents. Well, the impact of the deadly blast affecting dozens, if not hundreds of families beyond Longview throughout Cowlitz County and Southwest Washington. Signs already dotting roads and homes bearing the words, "Longview Strong." Blair Best spent Wednesday in the area hearing from those in the community about resilience and solidarity.
There's a heavy sense of grief here tonight, but also a lot of unease, seeing as the full scope of this tragedy is still unknown. But the sentiment that we're hearing today is that Longview is much more than just a mill town. It's a town built on grit, strength, and resilience, and we're seeing that spirit here today. One day since the deadly implosion at a Longview, Washington pulp and paper mill.
Yesterday it was, reaching out to our friends and, saying, hey, is, your husband, your wife okay? Have you heard anything?
Signs of strength and solidarity are showing up along the streets of Longview, the Columbia River city home to about 40,000.
Everybody looks out for each other here. Everybody's wants to jump in and help when tough situations arise.
The impact rippling through Cowlitz County.
Well, we have a lot of regulars that come in from the mill that come for our buffet.
The pizza factory in Woodland is part of a meal train for impacted families.
It's just a little bit of help, a little bit of relief, so they don't have to worry about food.
The Nippon Dynawave facility has been around since the 1950s.
Well, quite devastating because I've lived here my whole life and known a lot of people, of course, have been part of the mills.
Including Elaine Grisham's own family.
Yes, my husband worked there years ago, and my brother worked there for years.
The facility contains a Kraft pulp and paper mill, as well as multiple liquid packaging plants, employing about 1,000 people. Tuesday's chemical implosion killed at least 2 and injured several others. Recovery efforts still underway.
It's hard because I was thinking today, what a beautiful day it is, and I thought a lot don't get to enjoy that, and it made me sad.
Now, that woman you just heard from says her daughter is a nurse at a nearby hospital. And when the victims started arriving, she described it as one of the worst things she's ever witnessed. In Longview, Washington, Blair Best, KGW News.
We have talked about the huge human toll of this tragedy. Now, questions are growing about its environmental impact. Officials confirmed some of the chemical released in the blast ended up in the Columbia River and in a nearby ditch drainage system. For now, there is no threat to drinking water, but there are concerns about what could happen if contaminated water remains in the area too long. Catherine Cook has more.
On the Oregon banks of the Columbia River, across from the industrial blast site in Longview, Jason Kent is fishing for steelhead.
Was wondering why nobody was fishing out here.
Like many in the community, he's learning more about the massive implosion that rocked the Nippon Dynawave plant Tuesday morning. Top of mind, the lives lost. But there's also the environmental impact. Plant officials say white liquor, a caustic mix of sodium hydroxide and sodium sulfide used to make paper pulp, spilled into the plant's storm drains, contaminating local dikes and the Columbia River. They've recovered about a dozen dead carp from the dikes.
Hopefully, I won't be impacted, but that is something to keep in mind.
The Environmental Protection Agency tells us they deployed responders to monitor for potential impacts on local waterways and air quality.
They're coordinating with the U.S. Coast Guard and the Washington Department of Ecology.
It bears repeating, those results show no evidence of airborne contamination. We will, of course, continue to monitor over the coming days.
Their focus remains on contaminated water in sloughs and drainage ditches. Crews are flushing impacted water through the Longview ditch system, drawing it away from residential areas and the city's water supply and diluting it to a level that they say can be safely discharged into the Columbia River. For now, a warning for people to steer clear of these ditches and dikes.
The areas that they're speaking of to stay away from currently now are to the north in the industrial way from Washington Way to Prudential.
Back along the Columbia, officials haven't issued any warnings to stay away from the river, but there's clear hesitation from some along the shores.
We'll definitely be showering tonight, and we're not letting them get into the water because we don't want to have any more exposure than what they're allowed.
Catherine Cook, KGW News.
Well, this facility does not have a clean record. Our investigative team found a history of fires, complaints, and regulatory issues. After reviewing health and safety records, we found a worker reported unsafe conditions at the Nippon Dynawave site in Longview just weeks ago. On May 6th, state records show the state of Washington opened a safety inspection into a sinkhole created by a failed drain, and officials say it does not appear to be related to the explosion. Now, records also show additional safety complaints in March of this year and April of last year. In July of 2023, a large chip fire burned for days, damaging conveyor belts, a barge deck, and a maintenance building, and sending smoke across southwest Washington. And in August 2025, a separate fire broke out in a building used to repair railroad equipment that was leased by Patriot Rail. No one was injured. Well, federal and state records also show the plant has faced environmental violations and penalties over air and water standards. Here's investigative reporter Kyla Boshi.
Before investigators even arrived at the scene of a deadly chemical tank implosion, federal and state records indicate there was trouble at the Longview paper mill. Over the past decade, records show, the state of Washington has taken formal enforcement action against Nippon Dynawave Packaging 18 times for environmental issues, with fines totaling more than $43,000. The biggest penalty came in 2018 when the company released air emissions above the specified limits, resulting in a $9,000 fine. More recently, records show the company was fined in August of 2024 for discharging more solids into its treated wastewater and releasing more sulfur dioxide into the air than the permit allows. It is important to note we don't know if any of these violations are linked to the tank in question. But there's clearly a pattern of environmental issues. According to an online federal database, the Nippon Dynawave packaging plant has repeatedly been out of compliance with the Clean Air and Clean Water Act with significant violations.
And stay with KGW for continuing coverage of the aftermath of the Longview tank blast as crews work to stabilize the tank, remove the liquid inside, and recover those still missing. And you can always find the latest anytime at kgw.com or on our KGW mobile app. And if you or anyone you know was impacted by this tragedy, reach out to us if you'd like. We'd be grateful to share your story. Just text the number on your screen right now. It's 503-226-5088. Well, coming up, a psychology expert from the University of Oregon helps us understand what a tragedy like this does to a community emotionally. She touches on the trauma, the uncertainty, and why people often come together in moments like these. Stay with us. Welcome back. As Longview grieves, many people are still trying to process the emotional weight of what happened. To help us understand those feelings and hopefully help some of you navigate them, Dr. Cindy Huang, an associate professor of counseling psychology and human services at the University of Oregon. Dr. Huang's research focuses on mental health, cultural factors, and emotional well-being in communities and families. She helped us understand what many people in Longview may be feeling right now and what healing can look like in the days ahead. Cindy Huang, thanks for joining us. We really appreciate it. You know, first we want to acknowledge that those closest to this tragedy in Longview, the family and friends of those who are hurt or who have died, they're obviously feeling this the most. The emotional pain has got to be so deep. Our hearts go out to all those folks. But then the pain does spread out from there. So Cindy, Tell us what you think Longview's going through right now. What kind of happens psychologically to a community in the first days after a disaster like this?
Yeah, absolutely. It's, of course, always a hard time. And I think it's even harder when you have a smaller community and a tight-knit community, because it's very likely that even if you are not impacted directly by somebody in your family, you know somebody who knows somebody who was directly impacted. And I think that adds to the sense of loss and grief that could be happening. I think at the community level, with this particular type of tragedy, there's so many unknowns that are still up in the air,
Yeah.
which really adds to the like hypervigilance, or maybe just like the edginess that anybody might feel, regardless of whether or not they're directly impacted. So
Yeah, uncertainty is what we want to talk about as well, because in this situation, so many of the victims are still there on the site. For example, when those victims are missing or unaccounted for, does that complicate the grief for people?
absolutely. I think one of the challenges of grief is when it's never easy, but when you have an experience where it's expected, or you saw it coming. For example, sometimes there's a sort of grief process when somebody in your family is ill, and you've kind of expected a loss to be occurring. By the time it hits, you've had a longer period to manage and deal with the feelings that you have. With a sudden tragedy like this, it's not predictable, it's unexpected, and with the answers that are unknown, it can really edge up I think the thing that comes to my mind is hypervigilance, where you are watching, waiting, and it's that anticipation that adds to the uncertainty that can really have impact on anybody in that community.
Right, and the intensity of it, again, for the families and the friends, the strongest, but
Exactly.
it does reach out. And so how do people often how do they feel that strong need to gather publicly, hold vigils or create memorials, those kinds of things? What's the psychology behind that, and what's the result of it, I guess, too?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think sometimes when we're left with not knowing what to do, we want to do something. And gathering as a group, gathering as a community is one of the first things we can do. And it serves a lot of purposes. Psychologically, it helps the people who are directly impacted by the situation. It helps them know that they're not alone. It can also help the people who are in the community who wants to contribute to something, right? And gathering as a community to show support is one of the easiest and first ways that people can respond.
Yeah, we see the reader boards up, Longview Strong, other things happening, meal trains, and GoFundMe's too are out there for victims. Those sound like positive signs of community dealing with this. Are there some unhealthy ways that communities struggle to get through a disaster like this together?
Yeah, I think that is, of course, in all things human, there are some positives, and there are also things that can make things more challenging. And I think one very possible emotion that could be out there when people are feeling uncertain is anger. Like, anger could arise. They may, as people are still waiting for answers, families, friends, but also the community wants answers. Sometimes that anger can show up in ways that may be helpful, right, and pushing to get the answers, but may also add to the individual level of stress and just the edge and grief that people are feeling.
The angst, yeah, for sure. So what tends to help communities recover emotionally after a major tragedy like this? So we talked about some examples, but what's on your mind about that?
Yeah, I think of this as multiple steps, right? So these are initial days, and in the initial days, I think the gathering around people and being with people, if they find it helpful, is something that can be the first initial steps. I think as communities get more answers, I think there can be a process through which, you can start to gather around ways to get answers and what needs to be done. So I really love the examples you posted of people are really coming together to help support the family members, the individual, friends and families who need the support. That is absolutely one way to do that. I think one thing that I always advise people think about if they're supporting people who are directly impacted, is to ask the people who are impacted what they may need as the process continues, right? Because their grief will continue in ways that might be uncertain and will not be the same for each person.
That's really good advice, and I think it's something people don't always think of. It is to think they know what somebody needs and to ask, what do you need? How can I help? Yeah.
Absolutely.
I don't think we're there yet for Longview, but it is a resilient community. But the time will come. How do communities balance kind of that mourning with the need to eventually move forward?
Yeah, I think this is something that can often you see build from the ground up. So in these days, in these early stages, continue to gather and continuing the conversation. However, as they're dealing with the grief and meeting their most immediate needs, and as the time goes on, to continue the conversations with each other and checking in with each other to see where they may need some additional support and where they might want to move forward with the next steps of their process. I think to rebuild is such a multifaceted, issue. We don't know what is, I imagine that there are going to be the need for answers and wanting to know what happened, but there's also going to be rebuilding individual level families, individuals, people's feelings about the community and safety concerns, right? Moving forward, even if this is their place of employment, even if they're okay, this is somewhere that they feel safe continuing to work. So there are some widespread implications for all folks in the community, but to really be together with the people who are like-minded and to check in with each other about what they need and how to move forward from there.
Every situation is different. I know. I remember hearing a resident yesterday in our coverage say, "This is something Longview will, have to think about for decades to come. It will be that big of an event." And so, is there a length of time you think these emotional effects for a disaster like this linger in a community?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'd say at the community level. I'll start with the individual level and go out. I think, as we know, grief can experience very differently. I think there's, when we're thinking about trauma and traumatic experiences like this, there's often what we call acute symptoms, which are symptoms that are felt immediately and very pointedly. When you're losing stress, when you're highly anxious, when you're on edge and there's angst. Those are sort of symptoms and experiences that are very common early on. As time goes on, there might be a dampening of those feelings, not because they're not there, but they're just dampened and not felt quite as pointedly. That said, that then gives a place for more sort of regathering of what is it that I am feeling and thinking. And I think at the community level, it's more or less the same process. I think when we're seeing the communities gathered, that's the acute sort of immediate reaction and response that is happening at the community level. As time goes on, it may feel not as urgent, right? But that lack of urgency is not to be mistaken for a lack of, desire or concern or wanting to, continue to think about, do something about the feelings that they're having. So I've been thinking about just time as a factor. But giving the space for the different experiences that may happen, and stages of grief often ebb and flow as well. With new information shared, more feelings may become acute again, and that can happen at the community level as well.
Well, we're just about out of time, but I do want to ask you to briefly say, what's your message that you want the community of Longview to hear right now?
Yeah, I hope that everybody is there and looking for the ways that they can support their loved ones, but also take care of themselves. And I encourage everyone to really think about what taking care of yourself might look like. For many, it is gathering to support as a community and to support individual people. For some people, if that isn't what you're able to give at the moment, that's also okay. And so to take that space and give in a way that you feel like you can and be for your community.
Wow. Well, wonderful advice from someone who really has an expertise in this. Dr. Cindy Huang from the University of Oregon, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
And as we close this episode of Straight Talk, from everyone here at KGW, we're rooting for the community of Longview, and we're keeping the victims' families and loved ones of all those impacted in our thoughts. Be well and take care. We hope to see you back here next week.